Hi guys, in this video we'll continue on to Unit 3 of LSP510/03 Qualitative Research Design and Data Analysis. Unit 3 will be about qualitative data collection methods. So we will be going through two main, the most popular qualitative data collection method, which is qualitative interviewing as well as focus group. Yeah. So firstly, let's talk about qualitative interviewing. Now, conventionally, we understand interview in terms of how structured they are. When actually say something is unstructured, it's also called non-directed, means that it's like freewheeling, you just wing it conversation. So there's no list of questions. You will just be talking to your participant or your respondent as if that you are just talking to a friend. Yeah, it's really informal. There's no predetermined questions, like just go with the flow lah. Of course, in saying that, if you are doing this for research purposes, the questions that you ask or the conversation that's involved, of course, will have to be relevant to the research question or the research topic itself lah. On the other end would be the structured type of interview. This is directed, where everything is fixed. Yeah, even including the answer is close-ended, much like the psychometric survey that you've done online. Yeah, even the answer will be like in 1 to 10 what it is, etc. Much like a medical interview that is quantified fully. Order of question is fixed, the type of question is fixed, everything has to be done in as standardized as possible manner. Okay, so that is structured. Good example would be like a medical interview that I mentioned just now, or like job interview, where most of them will be structured, like the type of question that we ask. Of course, the response can be open-ended lah. Of course, most type of questionnaires that we have been through is in the between, which is semi-structured. Yeah, so something that's closer to structured one will be still standardized, but I say open-ended interview, much like a job interview. Yeah, but the same questions will be asked to all interviewees in general. Okay, something that's closer to unstructured would be like the general interview guide approach, where there is a guide that actually tells about this the researcher what question to ask, what type of answer is actually expected from the participant, how to actually proceed. There's no particular order that has to be followed, meaning that the researcher or the interviewer can navigate through the different type of questions depending on the response from the participant, where they can choose area that they want to focus more on, rather than following a fixed structure. Now, this is a bit more focused than the unstructured or conversational approach, where because you still have a list of questions that you want to follow, or the style of topic that you want to cover. The qualitative interview that we'll talk about is most likely similar to this, the general interview guide approach. Now, what is a qualitative interview? How is it different from the interview that we mentioned just now? It's basically the balance between semi-structured and unstructured. So you can see that it is in the general interview approach. So it's developed in response to a limitation presented by conventional interview methods, including the semi-structured one, where it doesn't actually put enough focus on the idea probing and asking for elaboration, etc. That is by nature essential features of qualitative interview. Yeah. Now, the number of interviewee that's involved, mostly in conventional interview, is actually dyadic, where it's one-to-one, yeah, or at least there's one respondent and there are multiple interviewer. But in qualitative interviewing, that could vary. It could go from one-to-one to one-to-many, where the participants just take their turn into answering question, to the focus group that we will mention later on in this unit, where it's actually allowing conversation between the respondent as well, instead of just between the interviewer and the interviewee. Now, the medium of interview now will move from just face-to-face to allowing for online or just through the phone. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, online interviewing or online qualitative data collection is getting more and more common. Yeah, and there are pros and cons about it. So some comparison between structured interview and qualitative interview, which is by itself two end of extreme as well lah. So structured interview already mentioned, there has to be a pre-written list, and it has to be followed in a standard fashion. Okay, in comparison, qualitative interview do have a list of questions, or more like a list of areas that should be explored, in terms of questionings, but there are no rigid structure. Again, the interviewer are allowed to actually navigate through the different questions, choose the focus point they want to go to. They can even ask questions that's actually not included in the original list. Yeah. A researcher wish to encourage open answer in qualitative interview and ask the participant to elaborate and give more detailed answer if possible, rather than just a yes and no, which could actually pose a challenge to qualitative researcher if that's the case. They do want to focus on rich data. Yeah, that's what I remember from Unit 1 and 2. Okay. In comparison, structured interview tend to be specified and close-ended. Yeah, the type of answers that could be provided is already predetermined. So this you can imagine will be quite clinical and fast lah. Okay. Our structured interview facilitate more a quantitative analysis again because they are using close-ended questions. The result or the data would be more in terms of numbers rather than open-ended answers where it requires a bit more interpretation, etc. Qualitative interview, the focus is that we want to avoid quantitative analysis method if possible, unless the predetermined data analysis method as content analysis, where you are using frequency analysis or like a quantitative analysis of qualitative data. Unless that is the case, then qualitative interview should be about again richness and openness of the data. There should not be a predetermined answer to it. So continue comparing between structured interview and qualitative interview. As mentioned just now, structured interview, because of the fixed structure, the fixed order, tends to take a relatively short time in comparison, to qualitative interview that actually encourage rich detailed replies. Typically, both qualitative interview and focus group, if done correctly, tend to expand quite substantially. Goes at least 60 to 90 minutes. That was the planning time. It's not really uncommon for you to go past time. Like if I plan for 90 minutes, it could go into 2 hours plus. Especially again if it's done well, everybody's contributing, the interviewee really want to share and got a lot of information to share. In that case, it might be a good idea if they are willing to take the time. So yeah, there's the differences, which means that for researcher, you need to actually schedule for the possibility of extra time. Okay. Structured interview is not normally recorded because the responses are relatively easy to record now. So there's no need for recording. But for qualitative interview, recording is basically essential. As we go through later, the interviewer during the interview is encouraged to pay more attention to the respondent and think about how to actually get more information and encourage them to share, instead of focusing on recording down the information. So having an actual recording would be really helpful in this case. In structured interview got a name because of high degree of structure. Yeah, everything is fixed, but because of that, the reliability, validity is quite high, especially if they are using a well-established psychometric measure lah. Okay. Reliability and validity, to you want to access it for qualitative interview, can get quite complex. Again, is not really close-ended data, it's not quantified. In that case, it's really hard to really test it or shows that it's valid and reliable. In contrast, then perhaps the focus should be in finding the meanings, yeah, rather than saying that it has to be reliable and valid. So structured interview, the interviewer's role is basically a question asker and answer recorder. Yeah, just ask the question and based on the answer given, just record it down. That's it. For qualitative interview, the interviewers are expected to be an active listener. Like I mentioned just now, instead of focusing on recording things down, they should actually pay attention to the interviewee themselves and actually adjust or steer the interview sessions according to the response provided. Trying to actually get them to talk more, trying to focus on an area that really relevant to the interviewee. Yeah? So structured interview, the power is with the researcher, much like quantitative research, where the researcher agendas and prior knowledge, everything is already fixed. There's no exploration per se that's outside of the prefix list of questions or research topic lah. In contrast, qualitative interview is largely steered by the responses of the interviewee. Yeah? As mentioned just now, the interviewee get to share whatever that is most relevant or important to them, and because of that, the interviewer have to respond and try to go with the flow lah. Because those are the information that is most meaningful and would be the richest. Again, it is the something that the respondents are feeling really essential. Yeah. So for structured interview, given the fact that everything is fixed, including the answer, there's limited or no scope at all for idiosyncratic response. Everything has to be standardized so that they allow for comparison between people. Okay, but in quantitative interview, rambling is actually okay. As you will see later in transcript, most of the transcript that you record down from conversation is not really making perfect grammatical sense. Again, it's people talking, so it's quite normal that it will have some sense of ramble, but the rambling sometimes could be meaningful as well, so as we will learn later. Yeah. So structured interview, again, standardized of questions and possible answer, but in qualitative interview, there's totally lacking. Yeah, there could be even new question that's introduced, providing the is something that's mentioned by the respondents was not put down earlier by the interviewer themselves. And all these things brings the idea that qualitative interview is flexible, while in contrast, structured interview itself is relatively inflexible. An interviewer in structured interview is basically like a hired assistant to ask questions and record down, much like a computer would do, like ChatGPT. Yeah, no different. Okay, for qualitative interview is more ideally the interviewer should be the researcher, because the researcher actually know the topic the best. They will be able to respond well and make the decision regarding asking questions, recruitment, and etc. On the spot, and no need to actually go through, and maybe they will lose a chance of getting more information. Yeah. Structured interview, of course, it still exists because it has its own usage. Typically, it seems really similar for quantitative in research, where it's used for hypothesis testing. Qualitative interview, on the other hand, is more consistent with qualitative research, where the focus is on exploratory nature. Okay, and for structured interview, repeat interviewing is quite uncommon unless it's for longitudinal study or when you are studying for, let's say, test retest reliability. Okay, but for qualitative interview, additional or repeat interviewing is quite likely, especially again if you have the data and then you analyze it, you found something interesting, but you want to verify it with the respondent, then you can actually have a second interview with the respondent. That's actually quite common. Now we already talked about the nature of qualitative interview. Now let's actually talk about how you should conduct qualitative interview successfully or efficiently. Okay, rapport with the participant is essential. Again, imagine the differences between you talking to your good friend and talking to a stranger. A stranger, if you are introvert like me, then we just mostly yes, no answer, and that is again really bad for qualitative research. And that's the reason why it's essential for the qualitative researcher to have a good rapport with the participant, so that it will encourage them to talk more, giving you more deeper disclosure, especially on things that are relatively sensitive, things that have to do with, let's say, medical history, sexual experience, all those things. Yeah, then things that you only talk to with your good friends rather than a stranger. Okay, although leading is okay, not really definitely encouraged unless it's for probing purposes. You want, as an interviewer, you want to avoid leading the interview too much. If you use too many leading, as in like you feel bad about this, don't you, and etc. too much, then participant might more likely to show demand characteristics, meaning that they will start to think that, okay, you really want me to tell you this answer, is it, like this is something that you really want? In that case, I will just give it to you. And when that happens, even for qualitative research, it's bad. It's not a genuine answer, it's not an actual personal experience, it's the participant are trying to be nice and give you the answer that you're looking for. Yeah, so in that case, it will not be good. That's why even for qualitative research or interviewing, the researcher want to be a bit impartial. Yes, you do form a good relationship with the interviewer, but you don't want to provide them too much hint as to what you are actually suggesting or thinking about the direction of the response. Yeah, so you want to ask questions that are really open-ended, where there's no direction suggestion at all. Yeah. Okay, so interviewer of course should be trained in good interviewing skills, because that is essential in order to guarantee the quality of the data, especially in terms of getting relevant information, deeper and rich information. So when you're looking at qualitative interview, you can actually start planning it in terms of three different stages. First one is the preparatory stage, where is pre-interviewing planning lah, basically. Again, it is a myth that qualitative research do not require any training and you just simply wing it. It's totally wrong. In a lot of cases, as mentioned in Unit 2, maybe in qualitative research, you actually require even more effort by, for example, determining the sample of interest and how to recruit them, etc. Okay, so there are several challenges. First one is of course obtaining relevant participants, as mentioned. So you need to take into account of biases like gatekeeper bias, sampling frame bias, yeah, and there could be limited time or opportunity to ask further questions if you do not plan well. Again, like I mentioned just now, especially for interviewing and focus group, you want to have extra time from the session itself, instead of planning different session back to back. If you do that, that means that you don't actually have time to continue asking interesting question or important question. You might say that, okay, fine, I will just ask them to come back next week, but you don't know whether they will come back or not. It's not actually, it's not a necessary thing or mandatory thing that they have to come and see you and talk about this. It's not court order, all right? So in that case, when the information is still fresh and memory is still fresh, you better actually ask it on the spot lah. Again, of course, the other thing is that if you ask them to come back next week, they might already forgot what they want to talk about. Yeah, but if you want to drag on and leave the other groups as already scheduled, that would be impolite at least, but also could be detrimental at best lah. So meaning that they would find that you do not respect them, and in a lot of cases, if you feel like you're not being respected, of course you will just drop out. You will not continue with the study, and that's the reason why you want to schedule it with a bit more buffer time between the session. So in terms of preparatory stage, the first thing is to determine on the research conceptualization and development. This one is quite straightforward. You just want to make sure that you have a clear idea of what is the research idea and what research question to be asked, and why qualitative interview is selected as the main thing. Like this is why we actually do this in your CA1, where you ask you to justify the employment or the utilization of qualitative research method. Next one is to prepare interview guide. So this is for qualitative interview specifically. A guide would be a skeletal outline of the process, including a lot of things, of course. Yeah, you have the list of questions. Again, remember, for qualitative interview, you are allowed to navigate or introduce new questions as you see fit as a researcher. This is more important, the area of topics to be covered, as whenever possible, you want to make sure that everything is all the targeted area are covered within the session itself lah. And like same argument just now, you don't want to drag it to next week if possible. How interviewers should behave, like how to respect them, try to avoid leading, serve more like a reminder as you are conducting your interview, and how to navigate the shift in focus, meaning that if you feel like, okay, they have mentioned something that's of interest, but I have not actually go through that part yet, so which question should I actually lead to or go to if I want to focus on that particular research area or research topic. Yeah, so it actually tells you how to navigate them. Now you can actually learn how to write this well. It should be arranged in a natural, sensible and helpful sequence, meaning that it don't actually take you several minutes to actually look through where you need to go. Of course, as a researcher, you should be familiar with the guide anyway lah, before you actually start the interview. So you should be able to navigate and shift through the guide quite effortlessly. Uh, and remember, the guide is supposed to be just a cursory reference, so it's just more like a general guideline. It's not something that you follow to the teeth. Again, this is not a structured interview, so you are allowed to go off books and ask new questions even, etc. Especially particularly when you feel like it's important, you are actually exploring something that you did not take into account of, but then it's just keep on emerging from the interview. So number three is to determining the suitable sample, which is again the main challenge, one of them. Okay, and then the language and etc. that you use is actually suitable for the population or the sample at hand. Yeah, language use appropriate means that you have to make sure that it's at the level where the respondent can understand. So for example, if you are interviewing young children, you want to avoid all professional jargons. Yeah, make it as simple as possible. Try to avoid long sentences that is for both young and young children and more older participant or more mature participant. Like long questions tend to confuse participant and they don't know actually which kind of what question you're asking. Like keep it short and sweet would be the best. Yeah. So like groups that like young children, etc., you need to realize that sometimes it's really hard to get meaningful information from them, especially if you are imagine interviewing, let's say even 5 or 6 years old. It's quite impossible if you want them to give you like an in-depth reflection or something, unless unfortunately you are studying things that is more traumatic lah. Okay. uh, Young adult toddler will be like that. The victim abuse, yes, the experience itself will be traumatic. There will be a lot to share. Issue is that they are not prepared to share. Again, the willingness to share is a really important thing here. Yeah? And in order to gauge how good your interview guide is or your sample, everything, whether they are appropriate or not, it might be a good idea to conduct a pilot interview. So when you're conducting pilot interview, there are two main things that you want to take into account lah. So the practice interviews, you might not actually want to process the data. If the focus is to see whether the interview guide is appropriate or not, the procedure, whether it's actually helpful, should you actually follow, or is there anything change, or you can actually analyze the data in order to inform or refine your protocol. As mentioned, it could be that you actually realize that there's something that you should put into the list and something you did take into account but you did not, so you can actually revise your interview protocol at the time lah. Of course, both of these practice can be done consistently. So for example, at the start I might not actually plan to actually use the data or actually analyze anything, but then through the pilot interviewing I actually found something that's quite interesting. Yeah, I feel like it's really essential for me to add it into my protocol. Then go ahead. Again, remember, qualitative interview is flexible in nature. So next is that you want to put into your plan about inter-interviewer interview comparison. So you want to review earlier interviews and see what are the information that actually comes out, the emerging patterns, yeah, or the conducting the earlier interview, whether actually review some potential flaws in your protocol or not. Then you can actually change your protocol. This might sound weird, but you do not need to ask the same list of questions to all participants for a qualitative interview. Yeah, so through several earlier interview, you feel like there are questions that do not actually generate much. It seems like participants really feel uncomfortable talking about them and they are not really important anyway. And in that case, you can actually remove them from the mix and try to replace it with something that's more essential or would actually get you a meaningful data. I know that there is always concern that if I do not ask this question, how I am going to get the data. But you have to realize that if the questions are making participants uncomfortable, they are not going to tell you, then what is the point of including them? You only discourage them from talking to you further. You will even inhibit them from disclose further on if you are asking other questions. So you want to make sure that they are in a state where they are willing to share and they are comfortable sharing. That is more important than saying that I have to cover all the particular topics. Yeah. So number six is you should be a plan, have take into account communication between interviewer. This is relevant if you have more than one interviewer. Again, remember in qualitative interviews, is relatively semi or unstructured, where the interviewer are able to navigate through the list of questions and topics. Because of this, different interviewer might interpret the respondent differently. They have different respondent also. They themselves have their own lens and etc. So because of this, the way that they navigate the information might be a bit different. In that case, it's essential for the researcher to make sure that information from multiple interviewers is actually quite consistent. Yeah, it's not like they have a bias where they only ask some question and do not ask others because of their own preference rather than like what happened to the participant. Yeah. uh, if you think about it, if certain questions really make participants uncomfortable, then it should be quite universal. Everyone will be uncomfortable. Most people will be uncomfortable with question. It will not be that for interview A, they are only uncomfortable for certain type, and for interview B, the style will be totally different. In that case, it's more the interviewer rather than the interviewee lah. And this could get quite messy. Like again, you don't want to disturb the flexibility here in terms of the interviewer interpretation. Yeah, and that's why then you don't want them to be totally affected, totally biased because of the interviewer as well. Due to that, you only employ multiple interviewer if you have no choice. Like you do have a big sample, rather big, but you have to finish it within a short time, then in that case you probably have no choice. You do need to engage multiple interviewer. If not, the researcher themselves should be the interviewer. In the case here, the objectivity or independence of the research is not that essential for qualitative research. Yeah? So then 7 is sample recruitment and selection. This is something that we already gone through in unit 2, so you can refer back to the information there. The next is participant management. It sounds really bad, I know, but this just simply means that you want to keep the participant interested and they are on board, so they are willing to actually come to the interview session. They are willing to sit down, and the time that's designated to actually answer a question, they are willing to share. Yeah, when participants actually miss appointment, etc., do not take it as if like this is your fault, or that they simply lose interest because your topic is not interesting. That might not be the case. People miss appointment for a lot of different reasons. It could simply be that they just forgot. They might even put it into their phone, but then at that day the notification does not work, so they did not even realize that they need to go and see you. Okay, in order to minimize this issue, then it will be a good idea to give people reminder lah, either sending them an email 2 or 3 days beforehand, give them a courtesy phone call like the morning before the session. Yeah, to tell them that you are really you really appreciate their help, their participation. Yeah, and try to remind them gently about the appointment. Don't be too forceful. Again, people are volunteering. Even if you pay them for their time, they are still volunteering. So try to be nice so that people are willing to come in and participate. If you try to be too forceful, people might actually come in because of the money. Then they either give you information that's not relevant, or they might even lie to you. I'm not saying that participant would be. It's just that you want the participant to be at a state where they are more willing to share lah, when they are talking to you or having the interview. Yeah. And remember to provide participants enough details regarding the studies. What is it about? What is expected to happen? Basically, what type of question will you be asking? Not to give them a full list, if possible. In most cases, unless they ask for it, you do want to keep it a bit more spontaneous rather than like a prepared answer, so that you want to make sure that it's more genuine. Yeah, but you don't want to lie to them lah. If you try to like omit something that's really essential and etc., then again participants might feel uncomfortable or unhappy or even angry. Then they will not be cooperative. You will not get the data you need. Then number 9 sounds weird, but selecting interview location can be a challenge. Because you have different participants, each of them are individual, and the ideal location for them would be different. Yeah, but saying that, you want to choose something that's comfortable, quiet, and could be uninterrupted lah. It's not like you go to their doorstep or the entrance of your office and then start interviewing there. Yeah, it should be something where it's comfortable, sit down, can actually have a conversation. Now, for researcher, the obvious choice seems to be the lab. Okay, and then you have to think about like whether it's actually convenient for the participant to go to your place or not. So for example, if your universities or college or office are somewhere that quite remote, it could be a challenge commuting there. Yeah, and if your office is only open during office hour, it might not also suit the participant, even that they also have a full-time job. Okay, um, even if you are doing this in office and your office do not actually have a room for this, like if it's not a university, yeah, so you don't actually have like a particular interview room or library room where you can do this, it could be hard. Okay. uh, then if you are doing this in your workplace, there could be potential disruption from your colleagues or just visitor from outside. Yeah, you can try to inform your colleague to not disturb you, but how it works will still depends. Let's say there's an urgent work and suddenly you need to complete it within this afternoon, then yeah, you will get disturbed whether you like it or not. Okay. And when participants go to the office, they might perceive it as clinical and sterile. Like it's not a place that they are familiar with. They don't feel like they are comfortable, and because of that, they might not feel like they want to actually share the information. The other potential site for interview locations who seems to be like obvious is the interviewee's room lah. Sorry, interviewee's home. Yeah, this is where it's comfortable and familiar to them, and they might be more willing to actually share information and disclose more. Bear in mind that given there is not a place that is under the researcher controls, there could be a lot of this potential distraction. Maybe children, animals, again potential visitors. Yeah, and presence of others in the environment, even if it's the family member or someone that they are familiar with, the participants' significant others, would still cause inhibition on the disclosure, especially on a deeper level, and if the topic itself is actually quite sensitive. You can think about abuse victims that are being interviewed lah. So level of skills of competence or interview would affect quality of kata as we mentioned just now. So what is a characteristic of a good interviewer? According to Cave 1996, those one who can make quick choices about what to ask and how. Again, this is essential for qualitative interview. Yeah, given the fact that they need to make a decision as to whether they need to change the order of question or which question should they actually follow or focus on. All those things need to be made on the spot and need to be really fast. You don't actually need to, you don't want to spend too much delay or silent moment over that. Okay, and which aspect of subject answer to follow up, that's as mentioned just now. They should have good knowledge in the topic that's being investigated, and hence the recommendation that the interviewer should be the researcher themselves lah. Yeah, they can be trained into a master conversationalist where they know how to actually keep the participant interest up and know how to actually talk to them so that they feel comfortable. Try to elicit more information from them. Yeah, get them to disclose more and close deeper, and able to tell a good story. That seems to be quite essential in order to get the respondent really participating and engaging and telling you and having a good conversation with the interviewer. Okay, and those who are able to assist participants in unfolding the narrative to help them to actually tell the story, but again be careful not to lead too much, yeah, as an interviewer. So next we come into the most complex part of it, which is the actual qualitative interview stage. Of course, the preparatory stage you can plan as much as you can, and you should do that. But it's really hard to tell what will happen during the qualitative interview stage. That's why any preparation and like a backup plan beforehand would be really helpful. Yeah, so there are several aspects that one interviewer need to bear in mind or take into account of. First one is how to record the interview session. Again, as mentioned, for qualitative interview, recording is essential. You cannot run from it. I can't imagine you actually try to record down everything. Example is try to remember last time when you try to put down everything that the lecturer say in the lecture, everything, yeah, verbally, including their expression, everything. It would be quite hard if it's not impossible. Okay, so using a recording is definitely a key thing here lah. But now with the cell phone as well as a computer, doing it might not be actually a big challenge. Yeah, but saying that, having an external microphone will help a lot, especially in a really noisy environment. A directional microphone would be really making sure that the recording is really clear. Yeah, and because you are doing a digital recording, back and forward movement would be really good, so that again you can navigate through the transcription, which is the key reason why one would have transcription in the first place. Okay, again, good news is that with the use of computer and smartphone today, it's not really a big deal. You can actually learn to do it quite straightforward. Okay, So video recording would definitely give you richer data, especially even if you are using automatic transcription. Doing video recording would make transcription more accurate and relatively straightforward. Yeah, but then video transcription by nature itself can be more intrusive. So you want to make sure that if you are going to do it, the participant actually okay with it. You have to be quite sensitive here. Yeah? If you do ask them whether it's okay for you to record it, most participants will say okay. They are already in go for the interview, like they are already committed somewhat. It's not like they are going to refuse that because of a recording, but it might still have a chance of making them uncomfortable. So if the interviewer, if you do pick up that they are uncomfortable about it, you might want to opt for audio recording. Again, the key thing is not to make transcription easy. The key focus of the research or a qualitative interview here should be making sure the participant tells you as much as they can and as honest as they can. Yeah, so they want to make sure that they are comfortable, so that it will help them to actually to do that, like disclose the information that you want in good amount and good quality. Then next we come to the orientation stage of the interview. So this is the early part of the interview where you actually introduce yourself. Things that you do here would determine how engaged your participant is with you during the session. So it is actually quite important. So things that interviewer should do during this time is saying who you are, what's your work affiliation, like what organization you're working with for this particular research, purpose of the interview, how long it is expected to be. The ethical basis refers to the idea that they can actually withdraw at any time. If they feel uncomfortable, they should actually tell you. We will go through some protocol for participant distress later. Yeah. Give interviewee a chance to ask questions before it starts. So, and still give them the informed consent. Yeah, tell them what the study is about before you actually begin. Then ask them if they have anything to clarify. Yeah, or some concerns that they might have. Then encourage them to speak extensively, even if something that is not really relevant to the questions or things that are not even relevant to the research topic, but they feel like it's important. Yeah, to encourage them to speak up. Okay, and you should stress that the interviewees should be the focus here. Yeah, it's all about their views, their perception, their experience, and everything. It's not about the interviewer. So, saying that, what qualitative interviewer actually do when you're interviewing? Taking note is oh no, as mentioned just now, recording is better. Don't try to take note. Put your attention to the interviewee. Try not to talk too much. You should ask the question, of course, but allow the interviewee to actually use all the time they have. Avoid interrupting them. So even if you feel like they are going off topic, just let it be. Let them disclose at their comfortable level. Yeah, just let them continue. um, the exception would be that where you feel like they have keep on going off topic, it seems like they do not understand your questions, or they don't know what is it actually about, or they seriously might lie on their credentials. They don't actually involve in the topics or have no experience in the topic that you are studying. In that case, you might want to steer the conversation a bit and try to make sure that they are still a good informant, as the criteria that we discussed previously. Okay, and remember, the direction of the interview is in the hand of the interviewee, not the researcher. Yeah, you want to steer it as needed. Try to be fully engaged. Again, remember, be an active listener. Silence can be used effectively. In conversation, silence might have its meaning. So it might be a time where the participant actually take a break and think about their response. It might be a time where they actually want to stop and really think about, is there something else they want to tell you, something they feel like interesting or important. So if that case, then let it be. Don't try to break it too earnestly, like I cannot have a gap in between. No, just let it be. Yeah, do adjust the level of questioning even in the middle of the interview session when you found that it's a bit too much or too little according to the level of the respondents. Yeah, and try to maximize interpersonal contact. Make it a bit personal, so that the interviewee will feel like it's much familiar and comfortable, much like a daily conversation, yeah, rather than a clinical research setting. All this is in order to again encourage disclosure. So here is the list of a stress protocol as suggested by themselves. Under what condition the interview would be terminated. If the participant decided to terminate, again, you need to make this clear that this is their right at the start. Yeah, or participant decided that they want to change it to another time and place, much better than they simply want to drop out lah. In that case, you must respect the decision, yeah, and allow the interview to be terminated. Even after the interview, the participants say that they don't want to give permission for the data to be published. You also need to honor that, yeah, because it's their data, they do have the rights over it. Now, under what condition would the researcher intervene if the participants are talking? Is when it is clear that the participants are actually having anxiety or distress during the interview. So they're really feeling uncomfortable. It could simply be physical illness, where of course you need to pay attention to. So if they continue to still sign of upset, especially when the type of a particular type of questions or research topic is being covered, then you need to be aware and be careful and adjust. Yeah. If you feel like they are unduly distressed, then you need to actually stop and ask them whether they are okay to continue or if they actually need something else or not, and tell them that it's totally fine. If they cannot continue, we can just make another time and place to actually do this. Do not need to push it through. Again, remember, the focus is not to finish this as soon as possible. It's to make sure that you get good quality data. Yeah. So if you force this through, it might result in worse conditions. Okay. So just be mindful of the participant conditions and try to adjust accordingly. Okay. So the researcher will, with the participant consent, refer to others if they request. So it's like the snowballs sampling lah, or actually refer them to particular professionals like a counselor or therapist. You want to gain their permission to call them later that day if you have to terminate the interview early, to ask them whether they want to continue another time or are they willing to actually continue or not. Yeah. Ask them if they would like a family member or someone from a local community to call, so that they can offer support. Yeah, give them contact details of user numbers and support group lah. Typically, before you do this, you would have already identified a counseling service. Could be in-house that is available in your universities or college. Yeah, or it could be an NGO that you have been contacted with and you know they are still active and actually willing to help. So number four will be the end. Much like any good movies, having a good ending is essential to a interview. Yeah. So both researcher and interviewee should feel satisfied. The researcher should feel satisfied that they have gained the data they need. The interview session has been insightful and meaningful. The interviewee should feel satisfied that they have been respected. Yeah, they have gained what they come for. They can share their experience and everything. They feel like they are really heard and pay attention to. Yeah, and they are really happy that they are able to share their experience. Yeah, that should be the essential thing. So there's some tips that can help with this. You as an interviewer might want to take a short time out break to review the interview guide periodically to make sure that you have covered most area as you can. Okay, so that you don't need to go back after it's really close to the expected duration. So interviewee should be given opportunity to discuss things and ask questions, particularly before the end of the interview, to see whether there are things that they want to share more or things that they want to clarify. Interviewer should thank the interviewee formally, make it quite formal. You can even come up with a script that you use, yeah, but try to be a bit more human lah, because that's the characteristics of a qualitative researcher, yeah. So check that the interviewer is okay with the recording again. So once at the start, once at the end, whether they are okay with the information being shared, like in the form of recording or not. And you want to debrief them again if there are any things that's not covered or things that you experienced or happened during the interview. Okay, make sure you provide them with the name and contact for counseling or therapy service as mentioned just now. And if you do have time to ask them for feedback, yeah, how can you improve, how is it possible that you can make it even more comfortable for them, where they are willing to share, is there something that they should be concerned about, yeah, in the interview protocol, to ask them. So that would be for qualitative interview. Next, we'll talk about the focus group. So what is a focus group? According to Gibbs, it's basically interview conducted in a group form lah. But it's an organized discussion. Again, it's not just a group of friends hanging out and just free-willingly talk about everything. It has to be organized as much as like a qualitative interview where a set of questions is there, a set of topics that should be covered is actually prefixed. Yeah, and the moderator or facilitator in this case will try to cover them as much as possible. It should be a collective activity, so it's not like a group interview where the interviewer asks question and then interviewee take turns to answer. You should actually encourage conversation between the participant. Yeah, uh, participant or respondent in this case would take an even more active role compared to interview. In qualitative interview, the researcher or the interviewer will still have to ask question periodically. Yeah, this one the ideal situation is that the facilitator just make clear what is the topic and what is the questions to be asked, and the participant will just have fun talking about it, sharing information, confirming each other thoughts or disconfirming each other experience, etc. Yeah, so it should be a collective activity. You should treat it as a social event where you encourage social interaction between the participant as much as possible. So again, focus is on the interaction lah. Now, how is focus group different from qualitative interviewing? Now, for focus group, it should be a more realistic representation of real life, given that it's not a one-to-one clinical setting where one person asks the question, the other person actually talk about their experience or answer. It should be people again confirming or disconfirming someone's real list. They become both the listener as well as the speaker. Yeah, so people are influenced by social setting in the normal life. It's not again like a one-to-one setting where people around them who are actually around them would affect their social behavior, and opinion because of that would change accordingly, again closer to real life lah. Qualitative interview in comparison in that case is less similar to real life because is conducted in isolation. Again, the researcher asks the questions, the interviewee actually answer. Yeah, the environment is different as well. Like I mentioned just now, in focus group, researchers have even less power compared to qualitative interview. Okay, so usually the of course the location is based away from natural environment lah. Like people don't find a room particularly just sit down and then have a conversation with each other. Okay, on the other hand, in comparison, qualitative interview can occur in natural setting. As mentioned just now, it can actually conduct in the interviewee's own room. You won't be able to do it in a focus group. Yeah, this is particularly relevant for qualitative interview in an ethnographic study where you actually study a particular culture by immersing yourself into the particular culture. Yeah. Then power dynamics, again, researchers have less power and control. Yeah. Discussion between respondent in the focus group can go independently without a facilitator. Actually, like that would be the ideal situation again. In qualitative interview, the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee is much closer compared to focus group because there's only the two of them. Yeah. So because of that, interviewer do have more control. The interviewee do have more control, but like still less compared to the focus group. Okay, and in terms of participants, discussion offer direct evidence about similarity and differences in the participant view. Again, they do compare between each other in the focus group. Qualitative interview, you only do that as a researcher after you have gained the data from the different participants. One thing about focus group is that although it would generate a lot of data, it could be limited in terms of depth. Again, people or each individual in do have less chance to elaborate more on their experience. Yeah, and interaction tend to prompt new thinking more, so they will just keep on coming out with new ideas, etc. Might not be a lot of chance to probe further. You can see how a facilitator in this case can be quite conflicted. One, you do want to ask a question to further probe it, but then you don't want to disrupt the natural conversation that's going on. This is particularly essential if you are running a discourse analysis, where the nature of the conversation or how the conversation actually unravel is actually quite essential. You don't want to lose that element of the data itself and focus only on the speech. Okay. So in comparison, qualitative interview will allow better flexibility here lah, in order for the interviewer to actually ask more questions to gain deeper data. So in comparison and considering these two, when is it a good time to use focus group? It's recommended that under 3 conditions you actually use focus group instead of a qualitative interview. So first is to use at the early stage of research. This is to help the researcher to explore and identify the key issues to be targeted and what type of who the target respondent should be. Again, remember one good thing about focus group or the advantage is that it's enabled to emerge or generate a lot of new ideas. So when the ideas itself is not clear, then might be that focus group will be able to tell you more information. Okay. Number two is to generate deep and meaningful data, but it's on a specific topic to be analyzed. Particularly when the topic itself is relevant to group conversation, then it could be a good idea to use focus group lah. Number three is general, to evaluate the findings of research in the eyes of the people that the research is about. Okay, so having a group conversation regarding the topic or issue would allow the participant as well to confirm that their own experience, to actually find someone that they can identify with. Okay, though this could be quite important because remember, qualitative research, social justice is a key element here. Yeah. Now, relationship between the interviewee and interviewer, again, as mentioned, in a qualitative interview is one-to-one situation. Yeah, so it's actually less complex, and you are able to go more deeper into the conversation and data collection. But again, in comparison, there's lack of interaction between the members, yeah, so you won't be able to gauge the natural interaction between people who are not interviewer or researcher and interviewee. Yeah, so depending on the nature of the question that you ask or research question that you ask, you can actually choose the more appropriate one lah. Again, there's no clear pros and cons here. It's all depending on what is your research question. So this figure gives you an idea of the steps to conduct focus group effectively. We'll go through them one by one. So number one is to plan the study. This is not much different from the qualitative interview one, yeah, where the focus is to come up with a shared understanding of the nature and objective of the study between the researcher first, then how you communicate it to the participant. Yeah, this is not always clear cut. Again, remember, one of the setting where focus group is encouraged to be used is when you actually don't know. You don't know what should be the focus. You don't know what question should be asked. Yeah, but even in that case, you do try your best lah. Make it clear to the participant like what is the research problem, what is the aim of the study, what should be focused on, reason and rationale of the study, meaning like why is this important, or why should they even give the time of their day, which is, I imagine, important and for everyone and precious for everyone nowadays to actually participate in your study. Nowadays, even if you are able to offer some compensation, it will not be a lot. So people are actually contributing and actually volunteering their time to help you as a researcher. So in that case, you need to tell them why this study will be important, so that is to encourage engagement as well. So tell them what is the nature of the type of information that we collected, like the type of recording that will be involved, how the data will be used, yeah, who are the stakeholders involved. This is particular essential if you are recruiting people from their workplace, yeah, whether the management or the decision maker of the organization is actually okay with it, are they actually on board. Yeah, then links to reason and rationale, you tell them how the findings will be important or how are they going to be used. Again, the more that you encourage them that the contribution is important, the more likely that they will be engaging. Next is to decide on the optimal group participant, like the size first. The recommendation size is about 6 to 10 per session. Large group do means more data, but then as the group get larger, it's much harder to facilitate between people. Like how do you make sure that everyone contribute, and how do you make sure no one actually dominate? In a larger group, people are more likely to imitate themselves. I don't know, it might not be the case for everyone lah, but to my knowledge is that people, it will get much easier for people to just hide in the background if you have a larger group and they don't need to participate. Yeah, and within a limited time frame, having a large group is a really bad idea. There will be people who do not talk at all, other than offering like really short or yes and no answer, even if you ask and direct them. Okay, but less than 6 focus group might not actually be stimulating enough. Again, the one of strength of focus group comparison to qualitative interview is that there are more people having a conversation, and the nature of that will encourage people to disclose more. If you have less than 6, it's less likely to happen. But again, it depends on the personality of the participant that you recruit as well lah. Yeah. Now, other than participants, you can have more than one moderator in a focus group study. Ideally, it should be one expert in conducting focus group who will be the main facilitator, and there will be an expert in the subject matter, so they can actually offer opinion or suggestion as to what to focus on, etc. during the middle of the focus group. So next is to optimize the group structure. This one have to do with the amount of contribution. So ideally, you want everyone to contribute equally, but that's not always possible in a focus group. You don't want it to become a group interview. Yeah. So you do want people to encourage people to talk. You do want people to talk to each other, not just to you, the facilitator. Yeah. This is a concern when there are people dominating. I will tell you now, this is more likely to happen, especially like 10 minutes into a conversation, they will start to have people who will dominate one. It's not that they are busybody or they really like to be in the spotlight. It's just the nature of who they are. When they feel like there's no one talking, they will take on the responsibility of trying to talk and to encourage other people to talk. Yeah, but that should be the job of facilitator. So you want to make sure there's no one dominating, which is more likely to happen when there are people who have different status, like if you are interviewing supervisors along with their subordinate. In that case, might not be a good idea, and the subordinate is less likely to talk if the supervisor or manager is actually there. Okay. And of course, for those of you, your facilitator identifies not talking, you can direct the question to them directly, encourage them to talk. But you want to be careful again, you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable doing this. So you want to keep the process as natural as possible lah. Okay. There are two obvious factors based on past studies that shows to inhibit contribution. One, when the group is really similar, the homogeneous group. Yeah, other than the situation where you are using homogeneous sampling design. As homogeneous group inhibiting contribution because the idea that, oh, someone already say what I want to say, then I don't need to say anymore. Yeah, that could happen. So when you do use a homogeneous sample, you want to make sure that you have a plan in order to get everyone to talk and get them to confirm each other experience. If you want to let them compare the experience, talk about how similar, how different they are. Yeah, which should be the focus anyway. Okay. And again, group contain people who have different status. Those who are superior will tend to dominate, even if they do not take on the active dominating role. People who are subordinate or at a lower end of the power distance tend to inhibit themselves from talking. So like if I don't talk, they are less likely, less chance that I will make a mistake. So next is to plan how many focus group. Now this one depends on the design of the experiment itself. If you have multiple category design, meaning that you include multiple focus group, yeah, already in the respondents, then you have actually more focus group to be conducted lah. There are things like double layer design, much like group are distinguishable on two dimensions, much like an IV of quantitative research. So it's like you are studying differences between Malay experience of Malay and Chinese, and in terms of the pandemic, but you also want to see how male and female have a different experience. Yeah, in that case again, you can see that you need to have different focus group lah. Okay. Or it could be broad involvement design, where in a particular setting, broad range of group is essential, meaning that you want to get the opinion from everyone. So this is particularly relevant when, say, you are collecting data from an organization that's quite large, like a university. Yeah, it's not just academic, isn't it? You have the admin, you have the academic, you have the head of HOD, you have those who like the cleaner, janitor, everything. All those people contribute, and all of their opinion might matters. So that's where you actually need to include a lot of different groups, and with different groups you have more session. Okay. So recommended number is that for each category you have about 3 to 4 groups. Again, it's not a fixed number, it's just a recommendation. As if you have enough data for one, if you only conduct it once and the data is saturated, then go ahead, you already have enough data for your findings. Yeah, then you actually don't need to conduct as much. So everything comes down or boil down to data saturation and sufficiency at the end anyway. So number 5 is to plan what question to ask. So firstly is to decide the type of question that ask, where you actually lay out open-ended most likely. Yeah, so the framework should be same as qualitative interviewing, so no need to actually repeat the information here. You want to make sure that the question asked is more suitable for conversation, not for like people answering you by writing down. So means that it should be something that roll naturally off the tongue and lips. It's not should be something that you read from the book. People can tell. There's like a big difference. So for example, when I'm talking naturally now rather than compare when I'm reading from the slide, it's totally different, as you can see. Okay, so make sure that it's a more the conversational in nature rather than like reading off the slide. Yeah. Again, you want to encourage people to respond in the same manner as well. Yeah, make sure that the language used is appropriate for the respondents so they are able to understand you. Or similar to qualitative interviewing, you want to avoid long and complex questions. Those things are only confusing. They don't know how to answer you because they don't even know what you are asking. Yeah, you can ask short questions, then try to encourage people to respond. It does not have to be long. There's no point doing it. Yeah, but at first it could be long because as a researcher, you already in your head, you already have an idea what questions you want to ask, what is important. So at the first formation, it could be like really long because you're trying to cover everything. But you do revise on that lah. Don't just use the first draft. Most of the time, you do have to revise on the information. Then only you conduct the experiment. Okay. Now, ideally, how should the question be organized in the course? What type of question to be asked first? So this chart actually gives you a really good idea of what to be asked first and how to organize it. Yeah, so flow of a focus group. You start off with, of course, the welcome. So you welcome everyone coming, tell them who you are, who you're working with, what is the nature of the studies that you appreciate their participation. Yeah, then you start off with the overview. So ask them about the really broad questions or really broad experience regarding a particular topic. So let's say if you are talking about again nurse who take care of elderly in the hospital, yeah, or during the pandemic, then you can just ask them the experience of working during the pandemic. Okay, ask them about like what they feel like about taking care of elderly, why they choose their work line, and etc. Then you want to establish a ground rules after you get people to familiar with each other, which is essential for a focus group. Okay, coming to the topic whether you want to do ice breaking or not, unless the particular group really like it, my recommendation would be no, don't do it. Most people actually hate it. I don't know why people are still doing it. It is pretty much a brutal way and fast way to get rapport developed between people, but most people actually hate it. And in qualitative research setting, you don't want people to feel uncomfortable. You only inhibit people from talking. So yeah, that's the reason why you want to avoid it if you can. Okay, so then you establish a ground rules. For example, do not talk over each other. This one you can have it or not depending on the setting that you have. Like again, you don't want to discourage people from talking, but at the same time, you don't want people to dominate as well. So you would change this accordingly based on your previous experience, or look at past research on the same topic whether they actually have this or not. So like, do people likely go over 2 minutes, or is it actually meaningful for people going over 2 minutes or not? Tell them that the conversation will be recorded and make sure that they're okay with it. Tell them that there are no correct answer, and please encourage them to actually speak more as they will. Yeah, willingly to do so, sorry, not will. Then you ask the opening questions. So first start with something easy and straightforward. Let everyone answer in turn. They will not start conversation straight away unless they know each other. In that case, you don't want to have opening questions and start people to encourage each other, talk to respond first. Then you have the questions where you encourage the people to connect with each other. So it could be that you ask person one questions and participant A actually answer, then you actually direct to participant B. So this is what participant A experienced. What do you think? Do you actually have the same experience, and etc.? That tends to be a good way for people to start conversation between people. Now again, the idea of comparison, compare and contrast, as well as the confirmatory of experience. Yeah. Then it could go into transition question where you are changing topic. This is quite a challenge that requires training of the focus group facilitator, where okay, I probably have enough information on that particular topic already, and they seems to be repeating on the information. In this case, I want to move on to the next one. Again, only when you feel like the information is being repeated, then you move on to the next one. Okay, you can add in key questions. Yeah, these are the one that's crucial for the experiment and the one that you want to make sure that you actually include them. Yeah, this will be the most informative lah. So you can see that it's likely to be highly open in nature, so that you can generate a wide range of information. And lastly, you ask the ending question. These are questions which call for participants to summarize their position. Yeah, so if you have a chance to decide again, will you go to college and why? So this is actually a really good example. So like if you do have a chance again, will you still want to be a nurse doing this, etc., especially during pandemic? What type of challenges you foresee, or do we actually learn anything from this, and etc.? Yeah, those are the questions that you can ask. So role of researcher in a focus group is just a facilitator. You do not express your personal opinion. You do not want to appear judgmental. So similar to an interview, you inform the participant of the purpose and objective study, ensure that they feel relaxed and comfortable. This might require observation on your end, and you are able to actually tell. Make sure that the questions asked is clear, and you want to encourage discussion. You want to steer the discussion. Again, if it goes off topic and it becomes repetitive and someone is not answering questions and contributing, by asking supplementary question, so like I showed just now, it could be that you are linking one person's response and ask another person to respond to it. Like a participant A says that the experience has been quite tiring and really close to torture. What do you think? Is it the same for you? Can you elaborate? Okay, so this is all to ensure everyone actually participate. Yeah, so highlight differences in perspective which emerge in the focus group, or the similarity lah. So these things are be helpful strategies in order to encourage discussion among the participants. Now in doing that, if you are highlighting differences, you have to be careful that it does not lead into argument. Again, this one is depending on the nature of the question. If you're asking about nurses experience during the pandemic, I doubt that it will lead to argument. It will lead to like a complaint, collective complaint about how hospital could have done it better, definitely. If you're linking this to something that's more like feminism stuff, like where you talk about do you feel comfortable talking about vagina in open and stuff like that, it could lead into argument if you are not careful, because ideological related questions tend to be quite elicit quite high emotion, and people could lose control. If you are doing that kind of research, then you want to make sure that you're well trained, or at least have a planning or what to do if this happened in your interview guide, so that you don't caught off guard and then you seriously don't know what to do, you're just kalam kabut. Okay, and make sure that you actually record the session. So if it's like automatic and etc., you want to find a time to check that the recording actually working well. This is best if you actually have someone else in the background lah, where we'll be able to check the recording in real time to see whether it's good or not. So where the data is actually shared with another computer, yeah, when you're recording it on your cell phone, so you can straight away tell whether it's good or bad. Yeah. So for today, we actually talk about the two main qualitative data collection method, which is qualitative interviewing and focus group. So hopefully you are able to decide which one to use depending on your research question. Yeah, we'll see you on Unit 4.